Welcome. My name is Brian Kellerman. This is a webinar for ISO 9001 for small businesses. Although I do have to say, for anyone attending that may be from a larger business, I think we're going to get to the core of ISO 9001 programs, and hopefully this will be applicable and usable for really anyone. I will say the idea for this webinar and the discussion of quality management systems, and specifically ISO 9001 quality management systems for small businesses, was a very self-centered topic, because part of what we're going to go over here is that Kellerman Consulting is a small business and we are ISO 9001 certified. So I actually have a lot to talk about as far as our own experience. Before I jump into that, I want to say that at our company, at Kellerman Consulting, our program is run by Phoebe Kellerman, who is my wife, and Tim Grady, and they have done a masterful job in our program. And all of our consultants participate in our ISO 9001 program and have worked with small businesses. So really anyone at our company could be giving this presentation. None of them really want to get in front of a camera, and I'm the kind of person who does. So that's the reason you're hearing about this from me. I do want to mention quickly, before we jump into the topics, there is a chat function on the right side of my screen. I believe it's probably on the right side of your screen. If you enter into this chat anything you want to talk about, I will stop what I'm doing while this is going on to answer any questions you have. It's my favorite thing about webinars. So if we are going through something and you would like some kind of specific information, please do not hesitate to ask. I would love to answer those questions. So as we jump into ISO 9001 for small businesses, and really for businesses in general, these are some of the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what's the minimum number of people that we need for this program. There is a minimum number, although it is a pretty small number. What do we need to, how do we need to train people? What do we need to train on? Who's involved here? And again, if it's a small business, probably a lot of the people that work at the business. But even if it's a business maybe that has a dozen people in it, of that subset or of that group, what's my subset that has to be involved? How do I make this all work? And what are the crucial parts of this program? And I want to start by saying here, when we work with people or when folks call us up to discuss implementing a ISO program, 9001 or otherwise, there's usually quite a bit of fear and a lot of concern about doing these programs. And part of that is a basic sense of this is way too difficult for us, as wherever the business is, way too difficult. And I wanted to start with who are the two types of people in each business that are causing this problem? Because ISO, while it is an involved thing, it is not nearly as difficult as folks coming to us seem to think that it is. And in the businesses we work with, there are generally either the folks who were tasked with starting an ISO program and have never done it, and they take a small look at there's some kind of book and there's some kind of rules, and this is going to be too hard. I don't even want to bother. The other types that are usually the resistance in a business are those who previously worked in a company that had an ISO program. Generally, those people were not really involved in the ISO program, but it was there and there were things going on, and they are going to insist up and down, this is way too hard. That with the stuff we were doing before, oh my gosh, it was so much work. We can't do it here. And I will tell you that during projects, I have actually been stopped when I try to explain to people how straightforward these ISO programs can be. And the resistance from businesses of hey, this is actually easier than you think it is. The response I get regularly is who on earth are you to tell us it's going to be easy? I'm sure it's going to be hard. The people who are telling you it's too hard, they're lying to you and really lying to themselves. I mean, it takes some work. There's discipline that is required in an ISO program. However, ISO, and we'll get to the slide in a second here, but as we jump into the minimum number here, I just want to say that, for us, for Kellerman Consulting, when we became ISO certified, it was revelatory for our business and really a profound movement forward for us. some of the things that happened are like employees that didn't want to participate left the business, which is a painful thing. It was disappointing, but like those people got out of the way. We put a structure into place. The people who stayed at our company got on board, and it has provided a framework to get the best out of everybody. And that is ultimately the benefit of an ISO program. It is like magic, and it's a real crazy magic because it's so simple. ISO is such a general thing. If you have had a chance to look at the rules themselves, you'll find that they are incredibly vague and very sort of unfocused rules. But that's because you have these books that are designed to apply to any appropriate business anywhere in the world. And so getting at sort of the core again of what ISO is about, like it has to apply to everyone. And the creators of these books really have done an incredible job of getting at a very basic sense of get these few things done and you will have a fully functioning business. What is missing for people trying to get started with an ISO program is really a philosophical issue, because ISO is at its core a answer looking for a question. And you as a business have to provide that question. ISO is just like it starts at section 4, it ends at section 10. There's that leads 7 sections. And it's very somewhat generalized, but man, if you have a reason for doing it, if you know what you want to achieve as a business and what you're aiming for, this is an incredibly powerful tool. So now let's jump into this slide that's been in front of us. What is the minimum number of people? Well, as the first sentence says here, you only need 2. Not 1 though. We do get people calling and they want to start a business and they want by themselves and they want an ISO certification. That is not going to happen. So if any of you participating in this webinar are thinking about starting a sole proprietor operation and you want to be ISO certified, it's time for a new dream, because this is not going to happen. You need a second person. As the slide indicates, that can be a part-time person. It can be a family member that is sort of coming in and checking on you. That is possible. So there are ways that we can make this work in a very small business, but we have to have more than one person. And as those of you who may have some ISO experience know, and really any quality management system or safety management system, the person who is performing a function cannot check that that function has been performed correctly. That is simply a bridge too far. There is no way around it. So there must be a second person. The person who does it can't be the person who says it was done right. So that means the person A has to pass it off to person B, or person B has to come over and look over the shoulder of person A and sign off that it was correct. So the minimum number here is 2. Sadly, there's not going to be a test at the end of this, because if there was, it would be easy to answer that question. Okay. So let's jump into, now that we know, like, we got to have at least 2. Now, granted, if I have a dozen people again in a small business, I might choose to have 3 or 4 or 5 people of the 12 involved. I may have all 12 people involved, and that's fine. We can have as many people as we want participate, but again, the baseline here is going to be at least 2. From a document control standpoint, and our slides here at the top, we have our version of headers that we use, and you can see there we use the term prepared by. Sometimes you'll see author at the top of ISO document, or writer, or originator. Any of those things, it doesn't matter. An outsider who would be evaluating an ISO program needs to see, like, where did these documents come from? That person does not necessarily have to still be an employee of your business. So if somebody wrote these documents and they are no longer a part of the business, no worries, because at this point we do need to identify, like, where did these come from, but the person who it came from, like, that's just a historical record. If you want to change it to someone who's currently at the business, so be it. But whoever the prepared by, or author, writer, originator, they better have read these documents and can actually answer a question of what's in them. That's a real tricky part of ISO programs, is like people take old versions of other documents they had at another business, or somebody passed on a nice set of documents for you. And since they're boring, no one wants to read them. And so the person who is assigned as originator gets asked a basic question of what's in these documents. And if they freeze up and can't answer it, That's not good. And an auditor, so they figure that stuff out in a matter of seconds in an audit. The approved by. Now here we actually do have a real need for this to be a current employee, because if I have answered the philosophical question of like, why am I doing an ISO program? And if I've provided that sort of necessary fuel to make this program work, and in doing that, or we as an organization in doing that, have determined that, like, hey, the person who is demanding that this program functions or is responsible for it is put on these documents, and that person is no longer here. Now there's some significant issues and questions about what are we doing here? If in this case, me, Brian Kellerman, if I'm the approver of all the documents and then I go get another job and leave, and we don't replace that approved by, and then somebody else is taking over, and it's like, well, Brian Kellerman's the person who approved these documents. Where is he? It's like, oh, well, he's not here. That is an indication that the program is not up to date, has not been reviewed correctly, and the kinds of change management that are necessary in a program like this have not been fully utilized. What we also have are a couple of topics here that you see on the left side of this slide that sort of indicate some of the types of document control issues that come up. So we have our header, like who wrote the document or where did it come from, who's approving this document. We have effective and supersedes dates. I will say the effective date, sometimes folks use origination dates, which are fine. Last revision dates, those are also fine. Any variation of like, when did we, the information that needs to be in the dates for document control is like, how old are these documents? Or when was the last time that these documents were considered to be up to date? We use effective date on ours, and that takes the place of origination. We don't care when the document started. It's like, when is the last time someone looked at these documents? What's the oldest date that these are the legit versions of this document? The supersedes would be like, what before that, when was the last change made? For us, that's so crucial, because when the review function happens in an ISO program, for those of you who have done an ISO program, there's a little box at the bottom of the document supposed to be the revision log, and the auditors really expect that in an ISO program. And if you are only reviewing documents but not changing, and you want to put those like I reviewed it on this date, you can end up with these very long histories of the document that are really just like, I just reread it. Well, the effective date really can accomplish the same thing. You don't need to necessarily document every time you reviewed it. You would just push the effective date up and leave the supersedes date or revision date the way that it is. And that way you can show someone, like, I keep upping the date towards this year or within my audit cycle, but I'm not changing it, so I don't need a revision date. So we keep two different dates on there, one for the revisions, the changes. And again, here, that is the supersedes date. That's the last time I made changes. And the effective date can be a moving target that I just keep pushing up to say, hey, the last time I looked at this, and this date, in this case, we put, March 22nd. So it's like a couple days ago. So if I were presenting this for audit, I would say, I looked at this 4 days ago. This is up to date. This slide is legit. It's cool. We made all the changes we need. The other things are changes to risks and opportunities in an ISO program. And we'll kind of get into this. You have to be evaluating the risks and opportunities of your business. So as those things change over time, and they should be if you're a growing business or a shrinking business or a improving business, those things are going to be changed regularly. We need the person who makes those changes can't be the approver of those changes. We have the actions we take to mitigate risk, which are going to probably be monitored and measured steps in our process. The person doing the monitoring and measuring cannot be the person who verifies and signs off on that. And then any feedback, any responses and communications from other parties, we have the person who elicits or receives that feedback. And then we're going to have someone else who has to confirm that that was done correctly. All right. So with that as background, or as precursor information, let's zero in on the training requirements for our ISO program. So, ISO is a funny beast. For those of you who have looked in that book, again, it starts with section 4, which is the context of the organization, and it ends at section 10, which is the improvements. Whenever we present documents to folks and we number it to match, so we start with 4 and we regularly get like, what did you guys screw up? Where's 1 and 3? Where's 1, 2, and 3? But in the ISO code, those are the preamble to the audit itself. So that just explains how things work. They are big into defining things, like giving you the definitions of words. So they really start at 4. As we move through the ISO code and you get to section 7, which is the resources section of it, that's where they identify both training and calibration, which we're going to touch on calibration here very shortly. They don't actually talk about training. The ISO is generalized enough where they don't have a functionary like you will train people on X, Y, and Z. But ISO is so fundamentally focused on communication, both communicating outside the organization to the people who require or who are benefiting from your quality management system, but also the communication inside the organization to the people who are responsible for the ISO program. And within this communication, one of the subsets of it is, did we explain the stuff that people need to run the program? And are we evaluating whether they understand it? Competency and awareness. Here we've put the actual sentence from the ISO code. And for those of you who have never read the ISO code, you can see just how generalized the requirement here is. You're just gonna determine what the competencies that are necessary. You're going to ensure that people are competent. That's it. So easy, right? Simple. What do they need to be competent in? And how are we assuring that they are? Well, admittedly, if a facility is building nuclear submarines, probably not a small business, but the competencies are going to be expansive. There's going to be a lot of technical information. There's going to be necessary educational standards, and there's going to be reviewing of things, and there's going to be constant trainings on updates. But if we are a service provider that is going to go out and install circuit boards into something, or if we're plumbers or electricians, something like that, the basic competence within an ISO program may not be super elaborate. What is absolutely essential here is that as part of this program, we have a list of who is involved in this program. We've identified what we need of them, and we are checking to make sure that they are staying up on those things. For Kellerman Consulting, for us, we as service providers, pretty simple what we need from our consultants. And everyone at our company is a full-time employee, so it's easy for us to maintain control over what the competencies we're looking for. Well, in ISO, we need each consultant has to be ISO certified or trained, having taken a training in which you get a certificate. So everyone has that. Well, every year we just need to do a review of our people. Thankfully, the current team we have is someone we've gotten to hold on to. I get to work with like the best group of people. And thankfully, they haven't left me, which is transparently one of my great fears in life, right? Abandonment is a real fear for all of us. And I am fearful that my awesome team of coworkers will leave me and I will be sad. They have not. And so when I go to review, when Phoebe and Tim go to review their program and they check the roster, it only takes but a minute. But if we get a new consultant, then we're going to have to check carefully to make sure they're on the roster of people that are involved in a QMS, and that they have gotten their competency. And that would be an ISO training certificate. But we also ask our people to expand their knowledge base. So we ask every year for someone to take an ISO course. We don't really limit it necessarily, but we want to keep people fresh. And that is involved here. Now, as is mentioned at the bottom of this, one crucial part of each ISO program is internally auditing the finished program. That's in section 9, it's towards the end. You have to have a completed internal audit. You really need one person at the organization to have taken a class which reviews internal audit training. To get a little confusing, the internal audit ISO code, or the ISO code for auditing, is ISO 19011. However, and that applies to all ISO codes. What an auditor really is hoping and expecting to see for an ISO 9001 program is that somebody has taken an ISO 9001 course. It includes the principles of internal auditing, and that you have a certificate for that, and that the person was involved in the audit. They don't necessarily have to do every step of the audit, but that either as the functioning person who does the audit or the person reviewing the results of the audit, that there is some training there. That's one certificate that really needs to be in each ISO program. Okay, so moving on to who needs to be involved here. Well, the involvement in an ISO program is, again, a philosophical question. How much do we care? Does it really matter to our business? Are we doing this because some German parent company is telling us in America we have to do this, and so everyone's really bummed out about it, but we're doing it anyways because that's what they told us? Or is it something that we actually care about and we really need this as part of our business and we care? That really generates a who needs to be involved. In a cynical presentation of an ISO program, the one that we don't want. And again, we had somebody in the company who told us it's so hard, so this was like pulling teeth. Since we only need 2 people, one of them has to be senior leadership, top management, right? Somebody in charge. And to go along with communication, which is the absolute engine of an ISO program, the boss paying attention, the boss caring, is the other piece of a successful ISO program. And those 2 things, if you do not have good communication and top management was not involved, you are really not going to be able to put one over on an auditor if you're lacking those 2 things. If we have documented communication and we had real participation from top management, from the person in charge. Now, who top management is really changes for each organization. And it's one of the generalized senses of an ISO code where they don't tell you the owner of the business, and it doesn't say the general manager or the plant manager, because it can be different for any operation. Certainly for service providers, we may not have someone that takes the position of general manager, plant manager, whatever. We may not have someone who is the owner of the business that participates. We could have a president, we can have CEOs, we can have COOs, we can have really production supervisors or service providers, service supervisors can run an ISO program. The buck must stop with that person. That person has to have control of resources. So they need to be able to sign checks when money is due. They need to have hiring and firing powers. If changes in the organizational structure are required within a program, you really need to prove that at least one person is the overseer of the operation, or at least is communicating with the overseer on a regular basis. Basically, you got to have somebody who's got some measure of being in charge. So in a business of 3 people, if all 3 people are owners, one person needs to take the lead on this, and the other 2 people need to take some kind of subordinate relationship, at least as far as this quality management system goes, right? Because I'm going to be the overseer. I will delegate down a couple of tasks to other people, or many tasks, and they're going to come back and I will be the person who signs off. Now, again, in this scenario of 3 people, I have my minimum requirement covered because there's at least 2 people involved and I get the benefit of an extra person. If there's a company of 12 people and 4 are going to participate, one of them must be from the top of the org chart. You cannot have a boss who basically tells 4 people in the administrative office, hey, take care of this for me. I don't really want to do this. That's functionally, like, in the realm of possible. Yes, that could theoretically work, but I mean, you are basically putting yourself in a nearly impossible situation or close to it. When the person who is the top manager is not available to perform these functions, there does need to be a backup. And again, that's where probably a two-person or operation is a tough sell. But when you're running the program, so when we have the originator of documents and the approver, and again, if the approver is also the top manager, that's a really easy sell for an ISO auditor. But even separate of that, as long as somebody who is in place of that top manager is able to relate back to them, hey, while you were gone, I reviewed the program and this is what I found, that will meet the minimum requirements of the program. So as you're thinking about your organization, small business or otherwise, you really need to think about, like, how am I going to make sure that a representative of leadership is participating in this program on a consistent basis? And then below or along with that, I have a couple of people who can crucially assure that communication is done properly, that all of the documents are reviewed and up to date, that an internal audit is performed, that management review is performed, that the risks and opportunities that are required in the program are properly documented. So with that, with those sort of that framework in mind and those sort of nebulous concepts that are spinning around us now, how long does it take us to do all of this? And this is really where the disconnect between folks that think an ISO program is too difficult and those who actually run one and find out that it's not really all that difficult. It takes some time, takes some effort, but it's not too difficult. The number I want to put in your mind to think through is that an ISO program, you can earmark about 750 hours a year. And that, I don't know if that sounds like a lot to you while I'm saying it, but 750 hours is not a full-time job. And in fact, that can be a huge problem in an ISO program because people get hired to run ISO programs, and that's not a full-time job. And if those people don't do a good job finding other things to do to go along with that, those ISO responsibilities, they're going to find themselves out of a job, and that puts the company in a difficult situation because we really need to make sure that folks have the ISO program responsibilities and that they are also able to meet some kind of other responsibility to fill out 2,000 or so hours in a full-time job. So that's 750 hours. What it really is, what is involved in that is going to be a full review of the program, making sure the internal audits get done, making sure management review gets done, training people, reviewing the actual operational records for performing calibrations. Those are tasks that there's some functions that are really important in that, and they do take time, but it's not an overwhelming amount of time. And I will say that if you're able to delegate out the 750 hours, Theta, I see your question. Let me just finish my sentence and I will answer yours in a moment. If you delegate out those 750 hours between multiple people, it can be a pretty light lift. So if 10 people are involved and it's 75 hours a year for 10 people, that's not really, I mean, we're talking about a couple of weeks spread out over the year of work. And that's what a lot of people in ISO programs discover, which is, hey, this is not, it's like, yeah, I got stuff to do. I got to put it on my calendar. Remembering to get those things done can be difficult. Performing a review of documents is boring. And sometimes people are avoidant of doing it, but it doesn't actually take that long. So that is a big factor in how long it takes to maintain an ISO program. But again, about 750 hours will get you done. All right. So the question is that for the document format, the supersedes which last change date, and why is the effective date less important than the supersedes date? You didn't miss anything. I might not have done a great job explaining it. So let me try again. So with documents, right? So we have our creation date and origin date if you want to have that, but that is not necessary. What is crucial about every document is when is the last time I reviewed it, and when have changes been made to the documents, right? Our revision registry. So the supersedes date what we use as supersedes date. It can be revision date. This is another way to think of it. When is the last time a change was made? So that is the most important thing that an auditor is going to look for, because from an outsider's perspective, and frankly, for people using the program, I need to know, is this the up-to-date version of this document? So, and I'm going to actually go back. Oh, there we go. So when I'm looking at the header of my document, that supersedes date is the last time I changed it. And here, this version of this header says that the document was from September 13th, 2024. Well, you can quickly look at that document and say, oh, I know we've made changes since then, so there's something wrong with this. Or it looks like we have not changed this document since September of 24, which is a year and a half ago. So if things have not changed in a year and a half, great. The revision registry, the record of changes, just needs to match. And so for every supersedes date that had been on the document, including the current one, there should be a revision recorded elsewhere in the program, the revision registry. In this document, there's also a revision of 3. So we're at the 3rd revision. That means there should be 3 dates associated with changes of this document. So there should be the original effective date when the document was created, and there would be an NA for supersede, because this is a new document. Then when I made revision 1, there should be a new supersedes date for the first time. Let's say the document was created in July of 2022. And so my original date of creation would be July 2022. And then January of 23, I made my first change. So now I have my first supersedes date, which was that July of 2022. My second revision, let's just say it was the end of 23, December. So I have my second supersedes date, and January will then have been a supersedes date that would be no longer on this document. And lastly, we have September 13th of 24 as the 3rd revision date. So I have 3. So the effective date, yes. So thank you. I gotcha. So the effective date is, when is the last time this was looked at? Forget changes. The effective date is a totally movable object. It should not be older than the supersedes date. It should be no older than the current supersedes date, because I changed the document. So I must have looked at it. It must be effective as of no later than the last change. Otherwise, that would be crazy, right? You cannot have a document that's effective that was changed earlier than later than the effective date. So we're saying that the date of the effectiveness of the document should be no later than, or no earlier than, the last supersedes date. But I can change it. I could change the effective date every single day, right? I can wake up today, the 26th, go on this document and say, hey, it was effective as the 22nd, but now just for fun, I'm going to read the document and I'm going to say it's effective as of the 26th. There's no harm in that. You can move the effective date up anytime you look at this document. It doesn't need to be done that way, but you can, because the effective date is saying simply, as of the date listed for effectiveness, this is up to date. So it serves as a last time I looked at it, or it's good as of this date. Am I overly confusing on that, or is that a reasonably effective explanation here? Good, awesome. I will say lastly, just think of it like this. When I change a document, I'm going to change all the dates involved to the date of the change. The supersedes will be the previous effective date, and now I'm changing the effective date. If I just look at the document, I'm not worrying about any supersedes or revision dates. I'm just saying, like, I looked at this document as of a date. It is up to date. And then going forward, I can look back and say that was the last time. And Theta, the most important part of all this is for your document review, that it has to be done every year. When you go open up your documents, what happens to the gap between September 24? Nothing. There's no concern about that gap, because all I need in my annual review is to confirm that, hey, this is the date, this version is the last version that was checked. So if the effective date is later than the supersedes, that's fine. That just means I went back in 2025 and probably 26 and reviewed that this is still up to date. Now, Theda, one thing I also want you to think about is that some documents get changed regularly. Things like org charts, things like emergency management plans in ISO 45001 programs, those have rosters on it. They get changed all the time, risks and opportunities. So the effective date and the supersedes dates are constantly changing. But if I have a document, which, for example, is going to be my change management document, that may never get touched. So my effective date may lag. It may go on for, I may wait months or years to check a document again. But the ISO code requires that I do a review every year. The effective date is how I show somebody, hey, during this calendar year, I looked at this document and it remains effective as of this date. So there, you do not have to worry about the gap between a revision date or a supersedes date. That's no big deal. And in fact, there should be some kind of gap, because if I'm not changing a document, but I have gone back and looked at it a few times, then I'm pushing that effective date closer to now. And all that's telling somebody is that this document has been reviewed. To think about it, if for someone to work with us, when they have an ISO program or they have some kind of quality management system documents and I open them up and it has a date of 2015 on it, I'm like, okay, you guys have not been using these documents. The documents that get used, those ones are the ones that someone opens them up and looks at them and the effective dates get changed. And they're also the ones that are reviewed regularly. So you only need to think of the effectiveness date as something that can, the only problem that can occur is if you never look at these documents and haven't updated them, then they're going to have an ancient date on them. And you're going to get questions of why has no one been looking at these documents? That helps. Okay. So yeah, we talked about how much time it takes. We're looking at the implementation, a sample schedule of what needs to be done on a regular basis for an ISO program. One thing I want to mention is that, you know, the purpose of this webinar was not to go through the how to run an ISO program start to finish. I believe we have previous webinars that kind of get at that. So if you do want to take a look on our website, there are free webinars that talk about like the organization of an ISO program. Within that context, though, what we have here are some of the very necessary, the most important actions that have to be performed within the ISO program. So we have the actions that need to be done and how often they need to be done. So the first action item here, a key performance indicator, which can also be aligned with quality objectives that are required in the program, those have to be confirmed every single year. So at least once a year, I have to go back to my objectives, make sure they are tracked and trended, make sure that they are appropriate and that I have not had any violations of those objectives or KPIs, or both. And that's done at least every year. If you set your review for those things more frequently than annually, then you can do it more often. But the minimum requirement is that our KPIs or quality objectives, those are equivalent terms, those are reviewed every year. The trending reports for those KPIs, generally we recommend that they're done on a quarterly basis, not that you're going to wait just once a year to look at those. They should be updating of it. Most businesses that run ISO programs are generally doing it even more frequently than quarterly. It might have monthly or weekly requirements depending on how critical those tasks are. However, at least some kind of quarterly review is recommended. Then we have our risks, risk assessments, and the trainings that go along with some of those risks, or just trainings in general. Those are also done at least every year. Now, the document control, and we put daily here. Your documents do not have to be updated every day, but every instance of a change in a document. So that could happen any day, right? Each instance is really every time we make a change, whether it's a new employee who gets added to a roster, I've added a new requirement, a new piece of equipment. If I have a calibration registry, I have a new piece of equipment there. That requires a revision change. And so that would be each time it occurs, each time a change occurs, that's going to be that sort of daily or each time requirement. I will say that a total review of documents and whether they are up to date and whether they have been changed, that's an annual requirement here. Things like specifications, operations, those things are the daily actions of our business, and those absolutely need to be done each time we operate. Or for specifications, if there's a new thing that's being done in operations, that would be each time that specification is developed. Some businesses have like new specifications all the time. So we work with businesses that are made to order businesses. And so they're developing specs for people essentially as a mechanism of taking on a project. So that's going to happen all the time. If you only make one thing and you have made it for years, then specification development may not occur at any given year. That would then be reviewed just as a normal part of your program once a year. But every time a new spec is developed, that is reviewed. Operations, every time I run, that is the guts of your day-to-day operation. And when I talked about the 750 hours of your ISO program, that does not include actual operations, right? You run your business, that is what's always going on. The 750 hours in an ISO program are these sort of review functions that go around operations. For the calibration of equipment or calibration of measuring devices, those are done as often as is necessary to make sure that monitoring is effectively done. Generally, those are scheduled. If you have scales, you get stickers on those. So we bring in a weights and measures person, someone who's qualified to calibrate a scale. They put a new sticker on and it has an expiration date. So anything that is calibrated with an expiration date, we make sure it's done within the expiration time period. If we calibrate our own equipment, then we maybe put that on a preventive maintenance schedule. Here, a competency, we talked about like training and competency. If I have someone in-house that does calibration, they need to have some kind of training certificate or something that can be presented as proof that they are qualified to do a calibration of a measuring or monitoring activity. But those things are done according to my schedule. The last bit, we actually had shipping and distribution in operations as a subset of other operations. That would also be each shipment that is either received into the facility or shipped out if we have shipping and receiving. If you're a service provider, it might be a truck, a person, a contractor or an employee going out to a job would be the same thing as shipping and receiving if you don't have a factory. And then on the right side here, we have a couple of the documents that are generated, or the records that are generated in addition to operations. So we have when a nonconformance occurs, much like we talked about document control. You don't have to have a deviation in nonconformance every day, but every day that one is documented, every day that we find a deviation or a nonconforming event, we would document it. Now, the key performance indicators or the quality objectives, anytime we have a deviation or a nonconformance in one of those, it needs to have a nonconformance. We do see in ISO projects, folks tend to be pretty light on nonconformance reports. We might get just a couple a year. That's not how I envision nonconformances. And again, we have webinar and training videos on nonconformances. I tend to like to see more than just a few. However, an auditor would be looking to see that at least any deviation against the core principles of the program get a nonconformance report, and that includes a corrective action, root cause analysis, and preventive action. The trending for those nonconformances, that is done at least every year. Then we have our internal audit. That's done at least once a year. Management review goes along with that. Internal audit should be following the internal audit. Satisfaction surveys, that's done scheduled. We recommend quarterly on that, but that could be annual if you don't get too many of those. And complaints, those are a subset of feedback of those satisfaction surveys. If you have someone who is complaining about the service or product, those should be addressed as they come in. So if someone complains, you should not be waiting to the end of the year to review those. So let's quickly, as we kind of get towards the end of this webinar, I do want to talk about the streamlining of the program and the use of software and technology. We personally, not only does Kellerman Consulting not recommend any specific software, any of them, there are a plethora of businesses out there that are pushing software and potentially very helpful software. We would never tell someone you should go use any software, much to the chagrin of the people who make that software, but we don't. We feel that any mechanism to record information and store it in a way that you know where to find it is adequate. If you want to use software to do it, fantastic. Not only do we not recommend software, we don't even use any ourselves, other than, I have a computer, obviously. You can see me through my computer now. We do store things in a cloud for our records. But we use I guess what you would consider an old-fashioned model of, hey, we generate our documents, they are stored in a digital filing cabinet, and we can access them when we need to. The people running the program, Phoebe and Tim, they know where every document is, and that's how we pass our audits, right? The auditor comes in virtually and asks us how we prove that a project was done correctly. We can pull up the finished documents that we generated. We have a running record of each project and what the status was. And we have the completed proof, which includes the survey that we send folks after the project's over. And it's really easy for us to demonstrate to any outside auditor, hey, we have a comprehensive system. We're checking at every step. We have a quality program in place. For factories, the easiest thing to have is what's called a traveler. And a traveler is a set of either one document, a checklist, or a set of them that moves along the process and is passed on from one phase to another. And whether operations or quality is checking off on it or not, that document proves operations each time it's done. Now, if you have one station, you may only need a single document. A traveler is a misnomer because it doesn't travel. Somebody takes it to a desk, puts it down, puts a circuit board together, and checks off that they did it. That is also proof of operations and is sufficient. Those things are verified by, again, top management or whoever's in charge of the quality management system and filed away. Software that does that, awesome. And we support anybody who really is able to integrate software into it. But the most important thing to know is that you do not have to have that to run a very good quality management system. ISO does not require it. They would never, there's nothing in the code or any kind of supplemental requirements that you have to use fancy software. That is not at all the case. And so the strategies for setting up an ISO program, rather than saying I have to have software, if you do purchase software, fantastic. And you can, hopefully that software is comprehensive enough to achieve all of the ISO aims. But if you don't want to use software or you want to try an alternate technique, what we need is a structure of the documents. What we use proprietarily for us is a version of the ISO code for 9001 in this case. We have all of the rules individually in a spreadsheet, and we hyperlink the documents that go with each rule. And so for our clients, when they go through audit, they can ask the auditor, what question are we on? Oh, we have these documents that we're ready to show you. That is a very strict organizational structure. It's not required, but to have your documents organized and ready to show an auditor is a crucial step in performing and achieving ISO certification. Sometimes folks print all the documents out and they put it in the order of the ISO code. That can be done. It's a really simple way to do it, but that certainly does work. We also, what we provide to folks is like a calendar, an action item calendar, where we take all of the documents that need to be filled out and we say how often they need to be filled out. That is certainly something that if you folks are sophisticated enough to do that in your operation, it really makes getting through the ISO code quite easy to do it. But there should be a structure to it. There should be organization that is not just some folder on one person's computer and it's like, oh, we just throw all the documents in there, and when the audit happens, we just hope we can find stuff. You really should have a proper home for where documents live, both quality and organization. Theda asked, do you do GFSI, lead practitioner certification? Our company does not certify anyone for those things. We're not an accredited body. In the realm of quality management, and you're asking specifically about food, which we also do. So GFSI is like ISO, but for food. The bodies that do trainings, they make money on that. We don't. We just provide free trainings. And when we are hired to do a project, we provide trainings, but we don't utilize our resources to perform that. So we don't have any paid training. We would, folks that provide that function, you pay them for the training. We don't do that. We also, when it comes to the ISO program, we tell people how to do the program, but we do not provide any certificates about that. And for us, it's an important thing because we like, in a properly functioning program, especially when it comes to the audit piece, the auditors are supposed to not be consultants. And frankly, the consultants are not supposed to be auditors. And we really, just to err on the side of caution on that, we just do consulting and we leave all the other stuff to other folks. Okay, so lastly, as we round out the hour here, what are supposed to be in the ISO program? I mentioned we have videos, webinars, and some training documentation on what is supposed to be in these programs. And if you go to our website, that has those videos, they're all free and available. But just to review what's in an ISO program, starting at the beginning, we have the organizational context. Who is the company? And that philosophical question of what is the point of this program needs to be written down. You have to be able to present that to an auditor. They expect who are the people who care about this program, both in the organization and outside. So those are interested parties. We also should have an organizational structure. So we should have like an org chart. So that goes along with the foundation of the program. Leadership, which includes you have to have a scope statement. You need to have your quality objectives or measurable KPIs, or some combination thereof. With that, the risks and opportunities that align with those leadership and organizational contexts. You have to have some kind of structured quality planning and change management, although those are not required documents. You don't have to necessarily have SOPs for that. You do have to have a functioning system, and you have to be able to show an auditor, to Theda's question, you got to have those dates right on those documents. And Theda, just to make sure I didn't overly confuse you, the system that you choose to use for document control, it needs to make sense to you. And if you say, listen, auditor, my effective date matches my supersede date. Brian Kellerman said something, I didn't get it. So I just do it this way, that still passes, right? You just have to know what choice you made so that it works for you. We need to have that for change management and document control. We need to have planning of the things that go on in the business, and that needs to be documented. We have to have all of the operations. Now, whether you have manuals or SOPs and work instructions, however you want to do that, if you only communicate verbally to your employees, it's very difficult to maintain high levels of quality. So we really should think through having written SOPs and work instructions, but the ISO code does not require written work instructions or SOPs. It's not written in there, and that can be quite confusing. They want to see order and they want to see a process. It's pretty hard to do it without them in writing. But when folks come to us, if they do not have a quality manual, we don't tell them you can't go through audit. If you have a laboratory in which testing is done, that usually, it's pretty hard to explain how you're going to run a lab without a manual. But from an operations standpoint, that is something that you need to have some like structure in place. Theta asked, can you have a copy of the slideshow? I should have said, we will email this to you. I think there's also a recording of all of this. So we'll make sure you have that. And anyone else that wants that, we'll make sure that it's available. Lastly, we have to do the review of the program, and that is the internal audit management review. Those need to have written records of those things. And again, much like the operations SOP, you don't necessarily have to have an SOP for how an internal audit is done at your facility or a company. You don't have to necessarily have an SOP for how management review is done. It is difficult to maintain order if you don't have it in writing so that new employees can understand it, but you do have to have at least an internal audit record. So we need some kind of checklist. And you need to have a management review record. And so usually folks have like a management review agenda and an output for each management review item. Those definitely need to be documented and maintained. There's an improvement requirement at the end of the code. And those improvements, you should have a list of the improvement projects, when they started, when you expected to complete them. Now, if you have an improvement project and you are running late on it, if things didn't get done on time, you're not penalized for that. You need to review it, review your improvement list, confirm, hey, we're not going to get this done on time, and you need to change the date. And generally, there should be some kind of justification for it. And I didn't feel like it. This was not a priority. I didn't really care. Not a great look in an ISO program. So probably something like, hey, we ordered parts and the parts have not arrived, waiting for construction to conclude. Those are all legitimate reasons. And those can be used to push the dates of improvement projects out if need to be done. There's also, lastly, I should say, to go along with improvement, non-conformance in operation, non-conformance in the management of the ISO program. Those have to be documented. That is also something that is expected. So where does that leave us from this discussion of what does it mean to do it for a small business? ISO, as I mentioned at the top, it's incredibly malleable. It's a very flexible system. We can get hung up in the specifics, but like from a 10,000 foot view, I'm supposed to be doing my ISO program for a reason, whether it's to get more business, to do a better job making specific products or providing services in my business, to make sure that people in my business understand what they're doing better. Those are all good reasons. There needs to be some core reason what we're trying to get to. With a quality management system, it's a little more apparent. Sometimes when folks are trying to do other ISO programs like 14,001 or 45,001, it's like, what environmental issues are you looking at? Or if I'm doing 45,001 with a worker safety, it's like, what injuries do we think might happen, and what are we doing from a management system to address it? Dita wrote, you're going to create a scorecard for top management. Is it a good idea? Absolutely. A scorecard is a wonderful idea. The thing to consider, though, is keep it really, really, really simple. The problem with scorecards is they tend to get complicated. Scoring things you can go wild on scoring things. So if you're going to create a scorecard for top management, it brings joy to my heart. That is a great idea. Make sure that you understand your audience, who in top management is going to be reading this, and try to make sure that you are keeping it at a level that's going to keep them invested in participating. If you give someone a scorecard and they look at it and they're just like, "Well, this is a lot of work," or "This is a lot of information I don't care about," they may tune out. And from a practical standpoint, you're going to want to make sure that it's really useful. But if you do that, you're going to be in great shape going to an audit, and you should be showing an auditor with a lot of pride and joy, like, hey, look at my scorecard. I make my boss read it. He signs off on the scorecard. Then you are in great shape. So lastly, with the last minute or two, what the auditors are going to focus on in your audit, they are going to look at that policy statement. They're going to look at your objectives, the tools you use, quality tools that go with it. So if you do Lean or 5S or Six Sigma, any of those things, depending on the complexity of your business, it can be really simple. Turtle diagrams are what they usually have in the training courses. That's a simple enough quality tool. They're going to look, you have to have an internal audit. You must have some kind of records of operation, and you must have a management review. You don't have those things done, you are not going to pass an audit. But if you have those things, negotiating the sort of specifics of how all the rest of the ISO program are put together, you and the auditor will sort out, hopefully in minor non-conformance issues, like they want to see a little bit more of this or a little less of that. But if you have these items, you're good to go. And then once these are completed, schedule that audit, get that auditor in there. Thank you so much for your time. We are coming up right up to that hour. I really hope that this presentation was useful. Thank you so much, Theta, for all the questions, and for the other folks that participated in the chat. It was really, really helpful in making this a vibrant discussion. hope to see you folks at the next webinar. It'll be coming up in a couple months as always. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you all. Thank you.